Afternoon, everybody. My name is Emily Kalifarsky, and I'm the Resource Development Manager at the Office of Aging and Disability Services. Resource Development Manager is one of those titles that often folks don't know what that means in sort of a practical sense. So I am lucky enough to work with the waiver specialists, Donna Benson and Alexi Greenleaf, very closely, as well as the resource coordinators that support requests related to the sections 21 and 29 waiver programs. So that's what my work is. I've been at OADS for almost 10 years now. So I've had the chance to talk or email with many of you before as I looked at names of folks who were joining us. So nice to see you again. And actually, when creating this presentation, I did think of many of you specifically, the different ways we've worked together and the questions that I could imagine that you might have when encountering this new system and thinking about how you would use it in your daily work. So again, I'm hoping that makes this training as relevant and clear as possible, fingers crossed. But again, I just want to start by saying I'm so glad to have the opportunity today to help introduce you to our new client data system, Evergreen. Before I go any further, I want to make sure that I introduce Leslie Miska, OADS Information Services Manager. As you can imagine, Leslie has been very busy lately, and so I'm grateful to have her support today.
Thanks, Emily.
For this training, as many of you are familiar with, all participants have been added in listener mode. That means that your line is muted. So we ask that you submit questions using the Q&A icon in your Zoom menu. We will answer as many questions as possible today at the end of the presentation. And please note that questions and answers from all training sessions that we've been having will also be posted to the Evergreen webpage under the FAQ. And I will do my best. Certainly, we want lots of time for questions, but I'll do my best to speak a little slower than my typical norm so that everyone can understand and have a chance to let some information sink in. So I do want to start by saying that this is an ambitious agenda. I recognize that. Overall, though, this presentation, I think of it as really as an opportunity for you to gain some knowledge, but also really begin to ask questions so we can understand, we can better understand areas where we think more support might be needed. So again, just to go through this agenda on the slide, during today's training, my plan is to cover the following topics. First, I'll give some quick context, because while our client data system is changing, we really want to make sure folks understand that the core elements of our PCP process are staying the same, thankfully. A new system can feel daunting, so I just really want to emphasize that my hope is that it will start to feel more familiar once the clicks and knowing where to look is not quite so intimidating. So then I'll be discussing adding services and the state review of the PCP. Next will be provider selection and service implementation plan. Classification, initial and renewal, also known as the reclass. And finally, prior authorization. So this slide here speaks to the bigger context that I want to provide very briefly, because there's enough other essential topics to cover. Because again, Evergreen is a new database, but the process of person-centered planning really does remain the same. There are still 5 phases as they're outlined in the PCP manual. Please know we are aware of the references to EIS in the manual, and we'll be updating those to Evergreen in the near future. Again, this slide shows the PCP annual cycle. And actually, I took a look back at the SIP PowerPoint that I was involved in developing in May 2022 when I was creating this presentation here today. And I was actually glad to see that, again, except for the references to EIS, the rest of that presentation is still relevant and hopefully helpful. So I want to take just a moment to remind folks that the enhancements to the PCP process came from important feedback. And I want to just briefly share some of that feedback that was behind all of these enhancements. I lost my spot. Again, the enhancements began in EIS, and I think we're going to see them much more beautifully realized in Evergreen, is the way that I would put it. So from self-advocates, we heard desire for increased self-determination and change in the PCP process. From the community membership reform group, recommendations to remove duplication and streamline, create plain language tools, develop a PCP that allowed for varying planning methods, styles, and approaches, and focusing on valued roles, places in communities, skills, interests, and as well, very importantly, implementing the Charting the Life Course framework. And then, of course, the HCBS global rule, May 2022, was, of course, provides that services are determined through assessment of functional need and personal preference, not provider preference. So the PCP process itself involves identifying the amount, frequency, and type of waiver service that's necessary in the most integrated setting appropriate. And of course, choosing services and where they happen is based on the needs and preferences of the person. So in the interest of time, I'll stop there. But I just wanted to give that context. I couldn't bear the thought of just launching into processes without explaining that, we were hoping you find Evergreen both efficient and helpful in terms of supporting the PC process. And we hope that once you're comfortable in the system, that core process again will feel very familiar to you still there. This slide is a depiction of the Evergreen PCP workflow. So again, many pieces of this workflow are not changing from what's currently described in the PCP guide. The suggested timeframe for starting an annual PCP would be 90 days before the plan effective date, and having all planning meeting documentation entered to submit for state review no later than 30 days before the plan effective date. So on January 24th, just yesterday, it's been a long week, there was a presentation led by Angela Faulkner called Comp PCP 90-Day Review. And I'm imagining that many of you did attend that, but if not, please look for the recording and the PowerPoint on that training on the Evergreen training webpage soon. And while I know there were several questions in that training regarding state review, excuse me one moment. Yeah, there were many questions at the end of that session that related to waiver services, but the focus of Angela's presentation was just on the comp assessment and PCP process elements that would apply to all persons outside of waiver program requirements. So I'm roughly going to try to pick up where Angela left off. It's always hard to create a clean break, but that was our plan again, that many different questions came in again with the waiver slant. But again, her plan was to focus just on the comp assessment and PCP process elements that would apply, even if there weren't any waiver services. Now I will finally show you a little bit about Evergreen, although I hope that many of you have begun poking around yourself. My dashboard is that first page you'll see after login. And then my dashboard is showing you this search tool. So it's next to the Evergreen logo. It's the navigational toolbar across the top of the page where there's, sort of some role-specific dashboard elements as well. So the titles are, the tiles that you see, they're called tiles, are announcements. So those would be alerts that are posted by ODE's information services or FEI, the vendor that created Evergreen. Another tile would be messages, and that's similar to email, but it's contained within Evergreen. I'm very excited about messages. And it can be used for communicating with other system users. And then the last tile that I'm going to talk about is My Note. So that looks and probably feels very similar to like a sticky note feature that you have on your smartphone. And I've just learned too, you can type something in there and then promote it to a progress note, which is pretty cool. So that's again what my dashboard would look like. There's so much work that's been done. I should just pause for a moment and say, so much work that's been done to try to create micro-learning videos and separate topical sessions that have been happening for some time now. And that's all available through the Evergreen webpage. At the very end, we'll summarize some of those resources. But I just felt the need to say again, this is, I'm picking up very much in the middle of processes. but just knowing that time is short and kind of wanting to focus. So it's really pretty insufficient. But again, here's my dashboard. And now I'm going to jump, be talking about adding a service or support. So again, my plan here has been to try to pick up sort of where Angela left off. I'm imagining, tell me if I'm wrong through Q&A, I guess, but I'm imagining that there's sort of a mix of folks here today, people that are case managers, people that are providing waiver services, people that maybe sort of work doing billing or sort of internal office type stuff for providers. That's my guess. So I'm trying to balance all those different roles and trying to think what might be most useful and as plain language as possible about how processes will work in Evergreen. So the image on this slide, the add service or support slide in front of you right now, this shows how a case manager would add a waiver service to the PCP. The steps exactly would look something like this. First, select service or support. That's the green button in the background of the screenshot. That will open the window that you primarily see at the front there, and that's where you would then choose waiver service from that service/supports type drop-down menu. And then in the service box, which is slightly gray on the side, that would be where somebody could enter keywords like home support or a procedure code and then click on the green search button. Then when the options appear, you would click on the plus symbol and link to add the service to the PCP. And as you probably will notice, a lot of folks know that dates are sort of a big part of what my day sometimes is involving questions related to. Of course, dates are important in authorizations. So dates will default to the full PCP period, but they're editable if different dates within that range are appropriate. It's really important to note, though, that the provider field should stay empty at this stage. Bit of a shift in thinking, I think, for folks. But again, we're thinking at this point about what is the service type, amount, frequency, duration. We're really looking to understand what is the service that a person needs. Don't think about provider yet. Don't even give us the information. And it will then go to state review. Sometimes I think for people, maybe it's most intuitive to think about this if you were to think of somebody that had, again, recently received an offer for waiver services. They're sitting down with their case manager. They've talked about functional assessment of needs and preferences, and they've thought about what's the full picture of my life, what are any natural supports, what are any other services in my life, and then now that I'm thinking about waiver services that are responsive to my needs, what might be the service and what might be the amount of that service? Would it be, again, 20 hours a week of home support quarter hour, 40 hours a week of home support quarter hour? And I think what I hope folks will sort of come to understand, while it might seem very strange to be submitting a request for a service to the state without there being a provider associated with that, I think, again, the importance of that, what I imagine might feel like a true benefit, is that, again, once the state review is complete, people will have information right at that point, again, about what has been, again, sort of reviewed already by the state. Our intention is, again, to be able to give quick feedback if there is a service or amount of that service that, again, we would not anticipate approving. So I think that hopefully might feel like a little bit of a off-the-cuff example. But back to the presentation. All right. I can't help myself. I see in the Q&A something relevant, so I'm going to speak to it. There's a question from Lisa saying, do we leave that service area blank? Let me go back for a second. Do we leave that service area blank, even if there is service that the person already has and it is expressed desire to continue with? Oh, Leslie clicked off to answer live. Oh, that's me answering live. Thank you. I was thinking you were typing, Leslie. Okay, so we are not leaving this picture here. I see why you're thinking that the service is blank, because in the screenshot it is. So I just want to clarify there. This is the point where you would be, if I was confident enough in my ability to open up Evergreen and click around, you would see that service area would no longer be blank. What I was describing, but don't show in the image there, is that, again, somebody could be clicking search, entering some keywords, things like home support or a procedure code, and then there would be a service that's generated there. What we're leaving blank, Lisa, is the provider name at this point in time. But yes, we would be adding a service at this point, just not adding a provider. Thank you for asking. Okay. So before I went off the cuff there with an example, so one service, multiple services, whatever is the person's decision, have been selected. The case manager then submits the plan for state review. And I know that in yesterday's Comp PCP 90-day review training, there were a number of questions about the state review part of the PCP process. And as I just started to say, I can see how it feels like a new concept because case managers are used to submitting PCPs to the state with providers already identified. So I think now might be a good time to try to answer some of the questions about the state review that at least I know of that have come in this week. I know there have been questions like, what does the state review look at? I think for the purpose of this training, it might be simplest to think of the state review as similar to the current authorization request process. I've also heard a question with a sense of concern about timelines and wondering how long a submission would stay at the state review stage. I want to be completely honest. Since we're not yet using Evergreen, I don't have the experience yet to give assurances about the kind of turnaround that you can expect. Certainly, I understand that reviews should be done ASAP. So there's plenty of time for provider selection, SIP development, PCP completion, and PA approval. But again, not having that experience, I'm reluctant to pick pick a number, of days out of thin air. But what I hope will give you some peace of mind is that Evergreen is amazing in that we will have a much greater ability to monitor submissions and timelines with Evergreen than exists in EIS. Many of you know, current process, receiving requests by email. So Evergreen is very different in that it's not the focus of this training, but some of you may have already learned a bit about notifications, which are role specific. So it's not an external training to show you sort of the view of what a resource coordinator would be seeing when they were in Evergreen. But again, there's training materials on that, or again, I know you can poke around in the sandbox and begin to get a sense of what kind of notifications a resource coordinator would be getting. So all that to say, I really just want to explain that piece, that yes, understanding that things should be done ASAP. I would love to be able to say, here is the time frame. But I don't have the experience yet to really have the confidence that I'd be able to give something that we could stick to. So what I'll just say is that nothing will sit in an inbox. The beauty of a central queue is that we'll have the ability to shift work if we need to different staff. Our intention is to try to maintain the caseload assignments that resource coordinators have had. I want to, again, assure people on that because I think that would feel like another change. So our intention is not to shift that, but I want to be transparent about the fact that there is a central queue of work that resource coordinators can all see. The kind of work that comes in from all different case managers and case management agencies that needs their action. And it's also something that the waiver specialists and myself are also able to see. So again, we will certainly work to be as quick as possible, but I can't pick a number of days and share that publicly right now. My apologies. We will see how it goes, and we will work again, like I mentioned, to be done our reviews ASAP because we know that there's a lot of stress about this. New step and fears about is there enough time left for all those elements: provider selection, SIP development, PCP completion, PA approval. So again, those are just some of the questions that have come up this week that I wanted to speak to right here and now. So the next thing I'm going to say, because I think I neglected to speak to what you're seeing on this slide here, is some of the technical elements in those screenshots. So when the case manager clicks submit for state review, it gives a notification to the state, like I mentioned. And then when the state review of PCP is complete, the state clicks submit for provider selection. It gives a notification back to the case manager.
There are a couple of questions that
I
have
was just looking at those, yeah.
to see if you wanted to take any of those live right now while we're on this.
Sure. Okay. First question is, will the state review be looking at the content in the PCP? Yes. And then the next piece is, I don't understand why the state has to approve the amount of service a client requests. Case managers all know how to use the cost calculator. Well, I hear you that it's out there. But in terms of, I don't have the rule citation memorized, But when it comes to prior authorization for services, the state's responsible to again, review requests for services. So I think that's why before it's an imperfect comparison, but that's why I was trying to say, what is this stage all about? I think I would consider it like, I shouldn't say former authorization requests because they're still happening, but current authorization requests that you're submitting to a resource coordinator. Um, Again, the piece about what fits within an established limit is, I mean, yeah, that's certainly part of it. But again, we're looking to understand that services are responsive to a person's support needs, that they're necessary, that they meet their needs and their preferences. Um, so all of that to say, I mean, it certainly does not happen, every request, but in my role, it happens all the time because I'm the person that folks go to when there are concerns about the appropriateness of a service, either in the amount or the type of that service. Um, and again, certainly Evergreen will do awesome things for us in terms of ensuring completion in a way that I know RCs will be cheering loud about, because anyone can make mistakes and forget to click a button or leave a spot, leave a spot that's not done. So Evergreen will do a great job at sort of, again, having checklists and making sure that certain elements of completion are sort of not what they have to focus on. But that's what the state review, I guess I would quickly off the cuff summarize as that it's much more than just making sure services fit within limits. The other piece to say too, of course, is we also have a process right now in Section 21, and as of March 1st, will be in place for Section 29, the request for exceptions process. So again, there's certainly circumstances where people are submitting requests for services which are not the norm, not sort of what they've had for years and years. And so again, that's part of our review process at that state review level. Especially important too, I shouldn't neglect to talk about this, is that again, that we're looking at what a person is looking at for services and approving that, right? So even if a person can't ultimately find a provider, sadly, to deliver that amount of service, again, it was very clear what's been approved in terms of a person's support needs. And I think back, to, not our PCP enhancements as of 2022, but prior to that, right? People could probably imagine our old PCP process where you would only see what was requested to be authorized, right? And so a lot of times I would be surprised, but it's because there wasn't a really clear way to document what a person's true need, my language, not anything official, was in terms of, again, they had the need for that amount of service. If it was increased a few years later, it wasn't that it had an increase in support needs. They'd always had that need. It was that they then were finding providers who could deliver that amount of service. So that's, I think, an important difference here in terms of, again, establishing what services are appropriate to meet a person's needs and preferences, and then the ability to approve that regardless of whether ultimately there's one provider or two providers, or there's a gap and there's not a current provider responsive to that full amount of service that's requested. It has been reviewed and approved already.
Thanks, Emily. And
Yeah.
the individual who asked that question did ask sort of a part two of that. So she's saying after the PCP, so she says, so after the PCP is finalized, the auth request is automatically forwarded to the resource coordinator. The answer to that is yes. The upon completion of the PCP, after you've gone through the state review, and then you've selected the providers and you've captured the signature and you've set the plan to complete, it will automatically generate the PAs and go right to the resource coordinator. That is accurate.
Yeah, and there's a similar question saying, so there are no authorization requests needed after the transition to Evergreen. I think the language itself is different. So I hope I'm being clear here. So what I'm talking about right now is sort of an annual PCP. There's also a change to waiver services type of PCP, but every request for services will come through this system. I saw a request about, are there services that get submitted to the clinical review team? No. Once we're in Evergreen, everything will be submitted in Evergreen. So I hope that that's something that makes you, even if you weren't feeling quite so positive about, if changes are hard for you or whatnot, I think I would be thrilled about that kind of a change because I'll try to focus again on the presentation in a second, but Evergreen does allow for uploading attachments. So any paper forms that, my quick summary is any paper forms that you are used to emailing to clinical review team email address, you can upload in the PCP because they relate to waiver service requests. All that to say, so we will coordinate on our end any additional review that's needed, but you, case manager, will not need to be submitting things different places. So if there's, again, something you need related to a waiver service, you'll be making changes in Evergreen to the PCP, putting it through that process, and there'll be notifications to the state, and it will all be happening within the system.
If
Okay.
you want
I'm
to,
get back
Emily,
to,
I
think I'm
see.
gonna,
Sorry, I see you took those two. If you want to hit them as answered,
oh, thank you, sorry.
yeah, it will close that out. And then if you want to get back to the slides, we can save some of these other ones, or if you want to try to answer any of these. I don't know if these pertain or if they're
I'm gonna skim them, I'm gonna skim them quick and
Yeah.
okay, there is a very different sort of question, so I think I can answer this because it wouldn't come up again later. Somebody is confused and asking for help processing and saying if a person has an identified support need and it's put in the PCP, and if it's a waiver support, but they don't have section 21 or 29, maybe they're on the wait list, maybe not. We still submit it to the RC for approval, look to get a denial. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. Sorry if that was the sense you got. What I'm talking about is I'm talking about a process for people that either have a funded offer or they're currently a waiver member and they're submitting requests for waiver services to be authorized. There is certainly a process through which in the application process, which is not part of today's presentation, but very quickly when you're applying for section 21 and 29, yes, you'd be indicating which waiver services were needed. But no, right now I'm talking about waiver members or people with funded offers, that process of requesting services. Okay, I see a few more, but I think
Yeah, go ahead and
in the
move on.
interest of time, I want to shift back.
Well, and I think you're going to answer some of these.
Me too, yeah.
You haven't gotten far enough in. They're preemptively asking questions, I think.
Okay, so again, the previous slide discussed state review and how when that's complete, a notification will be generated to the case manager about provider selection. On this slide here, state review is step 1 of phase 4 of the PCP process. But I think we learned this earlier this week too in trainings. I think folks were sort of alarmed thinking, wait a minute, thinking only Evergreen. So we can't forget to discuss the fact that things are also happening outside of Evergreen. It's not that you're, picking a provider within the system, right, without there being sort of with no rhyme or reason or consent or other discussions. There's vendor calls, and that would be again how somebody's making an informed choice. So again, vendor calls will still go through the OADS-Gov delivery system. I want to make that clear. We've just submitted the PCP for state review, and then sorry, I went back on purpose. So after the state review is done, the state would be clicking submit for provider selection. Okay. So on this slide, there's images that show how a case manager would go back to the PCP to invite one or more providers to complete a SIP for each service indicated. I want to be clear though, other parts of the form would be filled out already. It was a bit of a lazy screenshot, and then after it was finalized, I realized that you wouldn't have those empty fields there. So to be clear about that, there would be information about support needed and what it would look like when a person no longer needs or wants support. So here's the steps to the process to invite one or more providers to complete a SIP. You would click the plus sign next to add provider. And then my arrow there shows how the screen would change to allow you to then enter a provider name and click on the search button. And the image on this slide now shows the continuation of inviting one or more providers to complete a SIP for each service indicated by clicking on the plus sign next to link at the right there, circled in red, of that appropriate provider and location. The provider would receive a notification, the invitation to complete a SIP. And this is how the screen will look after the provider and location have been linked to the service. Then, to follow this chain, this is an example of what a notification would look like to the provider. That notification, when clicked on, will access the provider's location profile. And then when the provider clicks on the notification, it will go to their location profile. Hope I'm saying that correctly. Clicking on the forms icon would display the SIPs for the location, and most recent submissions would be at the top of the list. And then once a provider clicks on a specific person from the previous list, it would bring them to the SIP tab. They would not have access to the PCP there. I know it's visible, but I just wanted to say that. So the provider will complete the SIP and move the status from in progress to pending review. That will send a notification to the case manager. Need to quickly say that there is a bit of a temporary process. Leslie can chime in if I misspeak here. But if there's a provider who's new to the person, there is not the ability for them to be submitting a SIP because of a permissions issue. What will be happening is those providers will be completing a paper copy of the SIP. It's a very temporary process. And again, it's only for brand new providers. If there's a provider who already, for example, a person, they already have access to their record because they're already working with them, there's no need for this temporary paper process. But if it is a provider who does not yet have access to the person's record, again, they won't be able to submit the SIP in Evergreen for a brief period of time until this issue is fixed. So in those circumstances, the providers will submit a paper copy of the SIP to the case manager who can upload it. So again, beauty of Evergreen, very normal technology, I know, but attachments, very excited about attachments. So it can be uploaded to the plan through that process. All right, and so in the pending review status, that would be when a case manager is reviewing the SIPs with a person, and then a person is selecting their provider. So where that red arrow is, that would be, I know in some of our workflows, it talks about like adding the provider at the top. This is what we mean by the top. This is the top of, excuse me, the service/supports type page. And that is, again, when a person is selecting their provider, the case manager can add that selected provider to the top right there where the arrow is, and they would navigate back to the SIP. That's that second image there on the right, where they are moving the status to plan implemented. Okay, so when a case manager moves the, oops, I don't think I'm, oh, wait, yes, it did, sorry. When the case manager moves the PCP status to plan completed, that's when the prior authorization is automatically created. So it's taking the information from the PCP in terms of what's the service, who's the provider, what's the amount, things like that, and creating these PCPs. They're not approved yet, but they're created. So that's beautiful. It's not, manual. It's coming straight from the PCP. So all of our experiences of, things that don't quite match, it'll be a thing of the past. So, so again, prior authorization is created. Notification is then sent to the state service coordinator regarding the prior authorizations. I'm going to pause. We're going to come back to prior authorizations in a bit, but I want to talk about classification or reclassification, because in my opinion, if I'm imagining myself being a case manager, I want to think about that right now, because that is what you're then going to turn to at this part in the workflow. Okay, so the reason that I'm bringing this up now, the classification/reclassification packet, as it's called in Evergreen, I'm bringing this up now because it comes next, because the case manager needs to attach the PCP that you've just put in a status of complete. So classification, as folks all know, there's the initial, which is the first time, and then there's a reclassifications or reclass done every year thereafter. Some of you might be familiar with the application/reconsideration process in Evergreen. There was a training, was it 8 a.m. Monday. It was earlier this week. With Dawn and
It was
Alexi.
8 a.m.
Yeah,
on Monday.
they were the first and we're the last of the week. Yeah. So that's also a packet submission. So I just wanted to make that comparison in case that's helpful for folks. Just bundling information together. You're linking forms that already exist in Evergreen, kind of putting them all together and then sending them off so they can be reviewed and acted upon. Just pausing for a second to check the Q&A.
Yeah, Emily, I've been keeping my eye on it. We have the ones that we had left over, and I'm responding to one regarding the last one right now by I'll type in the answer and then it will pop up for people to be able to see it.
There's a question about how do we submit the signed face sheet for the reclassification. You will not do that process anymore. What I'm describing is replacing it. So by attaching the completed PCP as part of the classification packet, it's giving easy access. It's telling the state reviewer, look at this, this is relevant to what you're doing. So again, in that complete PCP, it will, at that point, it will be signed. They'll be able to have that information. So that's a great question to kind of make that, connection to current process. There's a question about, let's see. There's a question saying, right, when I add them, do they automatically get access to the client? I think that's
I answered a
oh,
part
thank
of
you.
the
Okay.
question. She's following up on that one, Emily.
Okay.
So I had previously answered that question, and it was a question about provider access to the client records in Evergreen. So I can certainly tag on and give the remaining question. So this individual is just asking, will providers have access to the person records in Evergreen? And I responded and said, yes, similar to the way that they have access in EIS, they'll have access to person records in Evergreen. And how that will work in Evergreen is once they've been chosen as the provider, selected as the provider for that person, and that provider has been entered into the waiver service section of the PCP, the system will automatically assign that provider location to that person record. And then the individuals that work for that provider location that have the appropriate role will be able to see that person record. So if they're a service implementation provider role, the role is got a weird name. It's actually called PCP data entry. And apologies for that weird confusion, but we had named the roles many years ago when we started this project. So anyway, it's this individuals who have the service implementation plan role, the people at that location that would need to do that, as well as individuals that work at that location that might have reportable event access, or they might have prior authorization access. They would then all gain access to that person record because that automatic location assignment would happen. Do you want me to take the one too right now? I was trying to type the answer, but I see we're getting a lot of questions in, Emily, so I can stop typing it. There was a question also around providers not being able to see the PCP, and I was trying to type that answer in, but it might be best to just
Sure.
take it live anyway. So someone was asking, did they hear correctly that providers won't be able to see the PCP? That is correct. In Evergreen, providers will no longer have access to see the full PCP. That being said, providers will see the portions of the PCP that they need to see in order to populate their service implementation plan. And they will see that because it will be displayed at the top of their SIP. So it will show portions of the person-centered plan that share things like the pieces that are about the person and their things that are helpful for supporting them, or things that are not helpful for supporting them, things that are important to them. They'll see those sections, as well as the goals that have been linked to this service and all of the needs, risks, strengths, barriers, everything that's associated with that goal tied to that goal and has that waiver service associated with it. You'll see all of that. It will be displayed at the top of your service implementation plan form, and then you'll be able to populate your service implementation plan form with that information.
I'm trying to be thematic. Anyway, I'll take a few more. So there's one question that's saying, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure if I was clear about my question being answered. In shared living, we have some folks with increased level support. Doesn't always match up with the effective dates of the plans. Also describing auth requests for assistive technology. You're right. In the past, they didn't always align with the PCP date ranges. We have been working to change that. So I think it may be possible, but I think I'd be surprised at this point if there hadn't already been adjustments so that an existing authorization hasn't been either extended or bridged, if you will, to sort of end at the PCP end date. So our intention is certainly to have there be fewer timeframes for folks to remember. So again, any service that's requested, I'll be clear about this. If it's at the annual planning, you request everything that a person would like. It goes through this process. Authorizations happen. If they've requested it for the entire PCP date range duration for 1 year, it's authorized for that time period. Every service in there, except, I mean, career planning. I'm going to find the exceptions, things that can't be a full year, or I never try to get into exceptions. Crisis intervention service, obviously different. It gets authorized quickly outside of the PCP by its very nature with that whole process. But in general, vast majority of services, I guess I just thought of another important exception, home support agency per diem or a group home service will continue to have to partner with Accentra, formerly Kipro, and providers will still submit in a Trezzo, and there will still be those authorizations, again, will not be year-long duration, matching the PCP date range, because a variety of people that may live in a home together and their rate is blended, established based on all those folks. So, but many services, there will not be, again, exceptions in different date ranges for some services that require review from a clinical nature related to AT or increased level of support for shared living. So I hope that helps a bit. Certainly, if it's mid-year, if a person requests a service, it would be authorized from that requested start date to the end of the PCP period. And then come annual planning, if there's the service they still want to continue with, then they'd be requesting it for another full year for the date range of that PCP. So I hope that helps, Heidi. There's another. Go ahead.
Sorry, Emily. There were a couple of other questions around that comment around SIPs and them not having access to the full PCP. So we should probably address those right now too. So there's a question that states, so does this mean providers won't need copies of the signed PCP for state licensing? And then there's a similar question a little bit further down that says, will our SIPs downloaded into our agency client record meet the main care requirement for having the PCP in our record? It specifies that we must have a PCSP and a SIP in our record in the new 29 rules that just came out. So I think on one of the training sessions not that long ago, this came to light for me. I was not aware of this requirement. And so I think what we gave for guidance was that the assigned case manager or care coordinator should still use the PCP print icon and print or save a PDF version and share that with the providers so that they can have the full signed version of the PCP. Is that what you believe the guidance was supposed to be as well? Yeah. So until we're able to get that remedied for you, the hope is that we'll be able to ultimately give providers access to print a full version of the PCP or obtain a full version of the completed signed PCP. But until we're able to remedy that, the community case manager, state case manager, whoever the assigned case manager or care coordinator is, would need to produce the active, completed, signed copy for you for your records until we're able to get to that. There's a lot more questions in here that I haven't had a chance to read through, Emily, but if you want to keep going, I'll try to read through these because I know we're going to run short on time if you don't continue on.
Luckily, actually, there's not that many more slides. And I think it will actually, I think some of the questions I saw will get answered soon. So thanks for the questions, and I'll just keep going with some information here. All right, so I think I did see, we spoke about authorizations and the timeframes for authorizations, getting them to match the PCP date ranges. Now I'm going to speak a bit about classification date ranges. So many of you know that we plan to align classification with PCP dates in Evergreen, like I just mentioned. So if you could imagine you're approaching a person's plan effective date, you've again been having the PCP was just set to complete. The previous slide talked about submitting that classification or reclassification packet. So again, folks are used to the fact that they have had sort of the reclass date. They've had a date to keep in mind, which is different from the PCP effective date. So the way that we plan to align classification with PCP dates in Evergreen, many of you already know this through recent communications with case managers, but just to take the opportunity to share, the way this is happening is having a shorter classification period generally. So we've been sharing information with case managers about the option to submit information for reclassification earlier, 60 days before the PCP effective date. I'll pause for a moment because this slide has a lot of dates in this, but I gave an example. I'm kind of a concrete person. Sometimes it's all or nothing. I can be big picture, but I also really like to be kind of really nitty gritty, so that my brain works that way sometimes, so we can try to be on the same page. So I like real examples. So this is a real example. This is a real person I came across, and this was their last reclass issued was July 29th, 2023. PCP effective date is March 13th. And again, so it went from 3/13/23 to 3/12/24. So again, right, the time period that we're in right about now is when there would be an annual meeting in PCP that's being completed, submitting the next reclass. So here's where maybe hopefully it won't get confusing to folks. So again, we've said you may submit that reclass up to 60 days before the PCP effective date. So we really wanted to try to be concrete. So that means for this example, somebody with a March 13th PCP effective date, you could submit the next reclass as early as January 13th. It may be challenging to think through right now because it's training about Evergreen and I'm talking about submitting things, right here and now, which is obviously an EAS process. But I'm just trying to explain our logic of how we're aligning things. My goal has been that a case manager does not really need to think too hard about this, that the famous last words, that the heavy lifting, if there is any, will be on our part. So again, we're saying you can submit it as early as, January 13th. Deadline though would be June 29th. So again, as you can see, the deadline is still 30 days before, the reclass date that's in your mind. So again, there's a big range there. And that's permissible because a reclass can't be longer than a year, but it can be shorter. CMS has no issue with us having a shorter classification period to waiver program. So again, that next reclass period for this example here could begin anytime between the PCP effective date, or it could be as late as starting on July 29th, as you would have expected in sort of this old logic. But whenever it starts, it will end on March 12th of 2025. So you see, hopefully, how, again, by having a shorter classification time period, less than a year, we will be able to align so that as of March 12th of 2025, this person's the time period for their reclassification will end at the same time their PCP ends. So again, it will be that from that point forward, it will match their PCP PCP date ranges there. I'm gonna pause a second there because the next topic is jumping back to prior authorizations and issuing them. So I just want to see if there's questions that are related to classification or aligning classification with PCP dates.
Yeah, there was one question and it said, so reclass will be due some point after the annual plan is set to complete. Do we have a time frame within 30 days post effective date, for example? And I think you answered that question in this slide, in this example, Emily, but I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I moved it into the answered questions
Oh,
because
thank you. Thank you.
I clicked on is it being answered live while you were talking? It's the second one from the bottom.
Okay, so right, so I'm trying to explain, I guess, sort of this bridging between EIS and Evergreen with this slide. But I think this question might be sort of about like in general in the future. And we, again, as folks are probably familiar with now, would be wanting there to be a timely submission of a reclass. So again, we want it to be, it needs to be prior to the effective date in the future. So right now, as this slide hopefully describes, there's a little bit of leeway because in like this example, this person's last classification was issued in QNX on July 29th of 2023. So it does go until July 29th of, or 28th of 2024. But what I'm trying to explain is, we're the reason we're accepting things before the PCP effective date now is because that's our plan once we're in Evergreen. And there were some folks who I think were, to be honest, understandably a little nervous about Evergreen. So thinking, gee, it's great I can submit it now in EIS in a process that I'm familiar with, and then that can be done. So in this example, if this the case manager for this person that I have pulled up here, they might not have been expecting in their typical workflow that they would be submitting a reclass for this person. They might have been thinking, oh, my deadline is, June 29th of 2024. But here it says it's submitted as early as January 13th. Again, the due date is prior to the plan effective date. I think we've said that the deadline for submitting a PCP for state review, our hope is that those are submitted no later than 30 days prior to the plan effective date. And as I just described, you have to be attaching a complete PCP to that reclass packet. So again, I can't tell you exactly when this, I guess the deadline is as soon as possible after the PCP is complete, because again, the classification will end once we're fully into Evergreen and everyone's dates align. You want it to be current so that we can issue it again on the PCP effective date, so that services and classifications in place for the year coming forward.
I think that was the only one that was related to classification that was in here. Oh, there appears to be one. I haven't gotten that far down, I guess. There is one here towards the bottom of the open questions, third from the bottom, that says, can we submit the PCP for reclass prior to the SIP being in? Do you want? So as far as the system goes and the PCP and completing it and doing the classification packet, the SIPs would need to be completed. So you would have to have the SIPs completed, and then you would be able to take the providers that were chosen or selected by the person and apply those to the waiver services in the PCP. And then you would be able to capture the plan signatures, set the plan to complete, and then it would auto-generate PAs. But then you would also have the ability at that point as a assigned case manager or care coordinator to create the classification packet or the reclassification packet and attach or link the approved or completed, signed, active PCP to that classification packet. And that's one of the classification packet requirements, along with on the DD side of the house, you also have to have the active completed comprehensive assessment and your DD yearly cost estimate attached, and then you can submit your classification packet. So you would have to have your SIPs completed, reviewed, approved, select the person would have to select their providers. The case manager or care coordinator would add those providers to the PCP under the respective waiver service, set the plan to capture signatures, set the plan to complete, and then do your classification packet. Link your completed PCP, link your completed comprehensive assessment, which came before your PCP in the process, and attach your DD yearly cost estimate and submit your classification packet. On the BI side of the house, there is no such thing as a comprehensive assessment. So if there is anybody on this call who's brain injury, you would link a level of care form to your classification reclassification packet, and you have 4 separate attachments that you need to link to your classification reclassification packet. Your I don't know the names of all of them off the top of my head, but they're your current paper processes, paper forms. So definitely, if you have any questions about that, submit them to us and we'll get you the answers for that.
I think one thing that Leslie, you just mentioned, you mentioned the annual cost estimate. That is just for a waiver application. That's not something we require for classification or reclassification.
Sorry.
The million
Sorry
things
for
to
the
remember.
confusion,
So
folks. I think there may be is there any other document that's required for the classification packet?
you're right. You're talking about you're thinking of the HCBS choice. Yes. Yeah. You're talking about
Yes,
that. Yeah.
thank you.
The choice. Yeah.
Choice. Thank you. Like, I think there's something. Thank you so much. Sorry to
So
create
I
that.
hope that no, you're fine. I hope that I'm wondering with some of the the comments coming in the Q&A. I hope I haven't confused matters, because again, I know that I'm showing you something right here on the screen, which is talking about submitting like information, like what I'm saying, like right now I'm saying you could submit your reclass in EIS. I'm just talking about like for the process of aligning. So I guess if you have questions about like current EIS related submissions or processes, like it may be best to talk after. I think I don't want to create any confusion. So I think what Leslie and I are speaking to is how things will work in Evergreen. So again, I hope that I've not confused matters by trying to explain how this aligning process is happening, but I just thought the folks might have that kind of a question. So, all right, so just a couple more slides, and we'll have plenty of time for questions, but the last few slides here are about prior authorizations. So there's 4 sections to the prior authorization. I know that image is very difficult to see, but I just thought so people would have the full range of information. Those 4 sections are overview, which is details about the service; provider information, which is information about the provider who's delivering the service; original request, which is what was requested for the service; and service information, which is information about the service status and the MIM status. So, and then when you click the caret on the authorization, it's called a caret, right? That little symbol, it'll bring you here to service details. So there's the, I think I got a little confused, sorry. So service information is going to be auto-populated based on the service details that are entered in the PCP. Authorization is that requested service versus what was the authorized service. Decision information is that decision and reviewer information. The MIMS response, so either approved or if there's any error. It's very exciting. Anyone that thinks about claims and whatnot will be very excited to know that we will see right away. We'll have to go looking, on an individual authorization level to see if there's any errors. And then utilization. So this is huge. Case managers, I'm sure, and anyone will be interested to know that there'll be information that comes from MIMS after providers submit claims and processing has been completed about utilization of units of service in each authorization. So I know that there's more questions, so it doesn't really feel like wrapping up, but I want to make sure I don't miss an opportunity to talk about practicing in the sandbox. I was thrilled. I got a message last night giving me information there. I've been sneaking around different ways, but it was awesome to see. So I'm glad to know that that's made progress. And I know that there's kind of targeted phased approach. So you may be hearing some good news soon about ability to practice in Evergreen. Make sure, please, it's really, I think, very valuable to rewatch informational webinars, microlearning videos, recorded training sessions, FAQs, tying up loose ends in EIS. So finish anything in progress that you can before deploy, Q&A sessions. And there is the email address for emailing questions to Evergreen. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah.
This is a very important moment here. Leslie's been working crazy hours, and I don't know how she's even speaking complete sentences anymore. There's been so much knowledge. So thank you so much,
Well,
Leslie.
as you heard, I was just sharing total misinformation on the classification packet attachment. That's where my brain is right now. A little bit fried, people. So hang with me. Sorry about that. But no, I appreciate that, Emily. And I'll also just take a quick minute. I didn't see any questions yet in the Q&A about this, but I do want to just head off a question about it. We still are working to determine what that revised deploy date is, but we are hoping to make a public announcement about that pretty soon. So keep your eye out for that. We're just, working with our vendor to make sure that we are truly ready to go live before we communicate that date to you. So we'll be coming soon. Where we can share that date with you, and the deploy itself is upcoming. So definitely take the opportunity to practice in the training sandbox, tie up those loose ends like Emily said. And I believe everybody should have access to the training sandbox now, with the exception of my team, who are the super users. I think those were the only ones that were lingering this afternoon. I think all the emails have been sent out. So somebody in your agency should have that information for you. So definitely check in with your change champion. If you have a change champion, if you haven't seen the email distributed yet, it may also have gone out to, a supervisor or something like that. But I think all the emails have been sent. So you guys should be able to get in soon if you're not already in there, and definitely take advantage of that. I think it will really help you to understand the system a little bit better, and also prepare you to be able to ask some more questions. So this is our last business process training session. And technical sessions are all wrapped up as well. However, there are 4 one-hour Q&A sessions scheduled in February. I think they're on the 5th, 7th, 9th, and 12th. I keep saying that. I hope those are the dates. I have not gone back to check. But they are truly just 1-hour sessions where you can come and feed questions through the Q&A, kind of like you're doing on these trainings. And myself, hopefully Emily will be able to attend some of them. Angela will hopefully attend some of them. We'll be there to field those questions and try to answer as many of those questions live as we can. And it will be a good opportunity after you've had a chance to play around in the system to ask questions after you've had your hands on the system. So definitely sign up for one or all of them if you're able to make it, and ask questions, listen to questions. They will all be recorded just the way all these training sessions have been recorded. And we will post answers to questions on the FAQs and things like that as well. And all of the sessions from this week, the business process training sessions, we are going to post the recordings, the PowerPoint slides. We hope to have those out early next week. But again, that does take some time to process all of that. But we'll try to get those up there as early as possible next week, so you have them while you're navigating around in the training environment as well, in the sandbox as well. So yeah, and thank you to Emily for putting this presentation together and for leading this presentation, and to all of my other business team members who led training sessions and supported that. There was no way I was going to be able to put together all these slide decks. So, and I just don't know the business process the way that they do. So really appreciate all of their help as well. So, and we do have some more questions, Emily. I don't know if you want to try to take some more questions. I don't know if you want to go ahead and read down through and call out the ones that you want to answer. I can try to read ahead and see if there are any technical ones, and I can try to answer technical ones by typing in the responses while you're reading some live ones.
There was a technical question towards the bottom about do we need to lock all assessments for migration from EIS to Evergreen?
Yeah, the answer to that question, I don't know where that one is. If you see it, Emily, if you want to hit answer live, we can. So for person-centered plans that are in EIS right now, you do need to lock the ones that are completed. So if they are completed, definitely lock those. If they are in progress, you do not need to lock those. all the PCPs will migrate over, but the completed ones need to have the lock in order to migrate into that appropriate completed status, whereas the in progress ones do not need the lock.
And there's a request
At the very
to
bottom.
repeat how much time or notice folks should have for Evergreen going live. If
I'll take that one. Yeah.
yeah.
So again, we hope to announce the deploy date soon. We will not announce a deploy date and tell you that we're deploying tomorrow. We are going to give you some lead time. I don't know exactly how much lead time, but we will give you as much lead time as possible. But I do want to stress that you should, it's not going to be far away. So you should definitely take advantage of the fact that you've been given access to the sandbox and training environment and make good use of the time that you have. So again, we're going to try to hopefully share that date soon publicly, and we will give you some lead time. I just don't know exactly how much lead time, but it won't be like a day or two. You'll get weeks advance notice, but I just don't know how many weeks.
All right. There's a question about somebody saying we currently use an ODES generated spreadsheet to track due dates. I'm guessing that's maybe related to reclasses because you have PCP information. So the question is, will that spreadsheet be updated to align with new expectations? No, but the good news is that Evergreen has a way to give you that information. So you do not need us to generate it for you. Is it reports, Leslie? I get confused between reports and queries.
Yeah, I believe for classifications, they'll use a query. So queries are
PCPs coming due.
PCP
Yeah.
coming due. Yeah, is that
Yeah.
what you want? I'm sorry. Yep, that's a report. Sorry, I was thinking of a classification query. So yes, there are both queries and reports available. Based on your role, you'll have access to certain queries and reports in Evergreen. There's a report called PCP comp or comp PCP coming due. I think that's what it's called. And that report will allow you to run that to determine what you can, filter by, you can put in filter criteria to see what PCPs for your caseload are coming due within your 90 days due period or 60 days due. You can run that report and see which ones need to be updated in the system and do the annual planning process. There are also queries in the system, so that your role may have access to one or more reports, and your role may also have access to one or more queries. And queries are similar to reports, but they are reports typically will show you like both in progress and completed data, like form data or whatever, where queries are typically not going to show you completed data. They're going to show you only forms that are still in progress and need to be completed, actions that you need to take in order to advance something through a process. There is a little gray area there because we did try to create several queries that we were finding some issues with. They weren't working exactly properly. So we did make some reports to replace those queries. So some of the reports are for in progress stuff like this comp PCP coming due. It will give you in progress or upcoming stuff. But all queries are typically not going to have almost all the queries would not have like completed records in them. If you want to see something that's completed, you want to go to the reports area to run a report for like completed forms, progress notes if your role has a notes report, or reportable events if your role has a reportable event report, or things like that.
There is I think related to previous discussion about providers, wanting copies of the PCP. There's a comment giving citation, which I trust may be accurate. I don't have it memorized. Speaking about that the member's record must contain the member's person-centered plan. And I agree. I agree completely. again, if our system is, not currently allowing for electronic access and printing, which to my knowledge, that was also difficulty that I don't believe providers were able to print from EIS either. Again, but I still agree that it's a requirement, and that would be something that upon any audit, I know would be an expectation in program integrity that you would have that. There's also questions about I believe from case managers saying, right now as a case manager, I have providers asking me for a copy of the entire PCP. Should I not provide this to them? If the person that again is requesting, is considering them as a provider and has requested that they complete a SIP, I'm not here to say that you should change your current process if that's what the person that you support is currently comfortable with. We're just kind of speaking to the Evergreen, access piece in terms of what will be viewable. But thank you for asking that. And there's a question saying, in the past, kind of connected to the PCP availability, in the past, licensed group homes were required to keep the full PCP in a person's case record, and they were reviewed during inspections. Will they still be able to print and file the PCSP for the on-site case records? So again, I think we've addressed that one already. The fifth topic.
Sorry, I moved it over, Emily.
No, thank you. All right, so let's see. Well, there was a question with, will they see the goals? Apologies, I think that relates to the SIP. So I didn't show you because the SIP itself is what it is currently. I didn't actually show a lot of the detail of what a provider would see. So yes, goals that are associated with that service. So I know right now there's sometimes, because the provider has to type in the goals, that will not have to be the case. They will be there. They will be there as they were in the PCP. There's a question saying, so the guardian or member no longer needs to sign a face sheet to approve the PCP. So I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie, I don't believe there's any part of the Evergreen PCP that's called face sheet, but there certainly is still a required signature for a PCP to be considered complete, to be approved. I know signatures were discussed a lot too in Angela's session yesterday, but I just want to be clear that even if, again, we're not calling it a face sheet, it is certainly still the case that for a PCP to be considered approved, reviewed, it's signed by the person guardian, and they should of course have a copy to read and review before that point, so that it's clear of what they have signed that they approve.
Yeah, it just doesn't use the same terminology, and it's not the very first page. It's actually the end of the plan is where the signature block is, and it's called the plan signatures section, and it does capture person. If they have a guardian, it will capture guardian and case manager signatures.
There's a question, Linda, you're challenging me. I focus so much on services. The question is, you choose the service requested on the goal page and for every goal. I know Leslie will do this better. I was focusing on, again, service and supports where you're choosing the services, but I believe that earlier when goals are created, there is, I'm going to stop right there, Leslie. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can help out. Yeah, no problem. So in the person-centered plan, there is a section of the plan called the My Life Planning section. This is where you're going to find goals, needs, strengths, barriers, and your services. And goals will the plan, the form itself, the person-centered plan form itself will automatically generate goals when you fill out the Getting the Life I Want domain-based section. There are 8 top-level Charting the Life course domains, and under each of those, there is a series, or there are 2 questions that exist under each of those domains. One of them is things that are important to me and that I want to stay the same, and things that are that I want to be different or change stop. And so when the assigned case manager, care coordinator is answering those questions under those domains for the person, it will automatically create a goal for each item that's entered under those questions. And those goals will appear in the My Life Planning section under the goals subsection. And in order to complete a person-centered plan, the goal needs to have other items linked to it. A goal has to have at least one need and at least one service linked to it in order to set the plan to complete. So you should, go through the planning process, capture all the needs, capture all the strengths, capture all the barriers, capture all the services, and then you'll go into the goal and you'll link up the appropriate need or needs, appropriate service or services, strengths, barriers, and associated risks to that goal. So each goal will have one or many needs and services linked to it before you complete the plan.
Leslie, there's a question about how long will EAS be in read-only mode?
You want to close that one out for me, Emily, that Linda question?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I will.
Yeah, so read-only mode, great question. So I'm not sure if we've 100% solidified the period of time, but I can definitively say that it will be at least 6 months. I think we're shooting for longer than 6 months, maybe even up to a year. I think it will also really depend on how well the transition is going for people, but definitively will be available for you and read-only for at least 6 months. There's a question at the very bottom, Emily, about if someone has no services, and I think they mean waiver services, can there be a case management goal? I don't think there's any reason that there couldn't be a case management goal. So yeah, the plan, no matter if it's a targeted case management section 13 plan or if it's a waiver service plan 21, 29, 18, all plan types will allow for the creation of goals, and goals can have services attached to them that are not waiver services. So there are multiple service types within the PCP. There's a waiver service type, there's a case management service type, there's non-waiver services, there's natural supports and services. So there are multiple types of services, but your goal could have one of those other non-waiver service types attached to it. So you certainly could do that.
And Leslie, I clicked off to answer live. There was a question about, but I need your input here because I don't believe it's a thing, but just to make sure. There's a question about, will the case manager be able to lock the SIP or is it provider only? Perhaps needed to be locked before submitting into Evergreen.
Oh yeah. So the EIS SIP, I don't believe that you have to worry about the SIP being locked at all. It's just the PCP itself that needs to be locked. But we'll make sure, I'll follow up with Lisa Merrill on that to be sure, but I'm quite certain that it's just the PCP that needs to be locked. You don't need to worry about the SIP. The way the SIP will migrate in is that because the PCP and the SIP were both created under that process in EIS, that process wizard in EIS, that's how we know that the SIP is related to the PCP. And so we'll migrate it over with the locked PCP.
I started to type, but I think I need to answer this one live in the interest of time. So there's a question about, I think, connected to our discussion about signatures and that the new Section 29 main care rules. There was recently an email earlier this week about the Chapter 2 for Section 29 being adopted effective March 1st. So somebody is saying that the new 29 main care rule has a change in language that removes the signed by the person, guardian, and case manager part of the rule. 21 states we still need it signed. I would be I don't know what to say. I'd be shocked and saddened if that were the case. That must have been an error if that is true. I'll have to go take a look at that. Thank you for mentioning that. But again, our expectation, certainly in our waiver application and federal requirements, would be that a PCP has to be signed. So I'll have to take a look at that. Thank you for mentioning it. Okay, let's see. Leslie, here's a question I think for you. Will access to records depend on role? Will waiver service providers be able to view the psychosocial? There's no longer a psychosocial assessment. The comprehensive assessment has taken the psychosocial BMS 99 and
Parts of the V7.
thank you. But take it away, Leslie, in terms of access.
Yeah, no, great question. Yes, Evergreen is role-based, similar to our EIS system, it is role-based. So depending on your role, you will have access to certain person records, forms, modules, things like that. Providers will, however, have access to view the comprehensive assessment, I believe. So hopefully I'm not mistaking that. But I believe providers will have access to view the comprehensive assessment, which replaces the psychosocial. And you'll also have access to view attachments on the person record. And the psychosocials that exist in EIS will migrate over to the person record as a bulk attachment, because we don't have a corresponding psychosocial in Evergreen. We're migrating the psychosocials that exist in EIS as PDF attachments to the person record, so that you can still find them and see them in there, so you don't have to log into a separate system for them, the historic ones. But then moving forward in Evergreen, you'll complete the community case manager or care coordinator will complete, sorry, not care coordinators because that's BI, but community case managers will complete a comprehensive assessment, which replaces that psychosocial. We just, I'm pretty sure I'm not giving misinformation on that. Comprehensive assessment access.
Leslie, there's a question saying, when the system assigns a provider location to a record, is there already an assigned staff assigned to that provider location?
Good question. So yes, the way it works similar to the way that it works in EIS now, right? So in the sense of like how providers and staff users get added to the system. So it'll follow the same process for like a new organization or location. You'll reach out to ODES if you want to go through the approval process to become a new location, providing services to our clients. And once you go through that process, you'll go through the main care enrollment for that location or top level organization. And you'll get enrolled to provide services for that waiver. And then once you've been approved to provide those services, your organization and or locations will get added to Evergreen by my team. And then once your organization and or locations is added to Evergreen, you can your organization can submit new user request forms. It'll look similar to the EIS new user request form. And those staff persons can have a variety of roles similar to the way that they do in EIS right now. They could be a community case manager, a BI care coordinator. They could be a reportable events provider user only. So they might only be going into the system to do reportable events. They might be a service authorization or a PA provider where they're going into the system because they help manage the service authorizations and do the claiming and the other in the MIN system. So we'll have a form that looks almost identical to the EIS form, but instead it will have the relevant Evergreen provider roles, and your director, program manager, supervisors, whoever it might be that manages that for you in your organization would fill out those new user forms for all the staff that they want added to the system, submit those to us similarly to the way that they do right now through our support email. Right now, it's the EIS support email box. It will futuristically be an Evergreen support email box. And then we will set those new users up. And so then that way they'll be in the system when you're going through the person-centered planning process. And then when you, invite that provider to submit their service implementation plan, the system will automatically create that location assignment because the location exists. And then the staff that are already under added to the system under that location would then gain access to the person record once that provider has been selected, chosen, added to the service, the plan has been completed, and that location assignment gets created.
All right, I'm trying to read fast. There's some questions that I start to read, but then I get stressed that I'm taking too long because I want to make sure I understand the question. There's some folks asking repeated questions that I might think it makes most sense to follow up individually because I'm not quite sure. It seems like a more extended conversation. But Leslie, another question I think will be fairly fast for you. What about SIPs that are not currently linked to plan and processes? If they're in assessments, will they not transfer to Evergreen?
Ooh, yeah, that's another great question. They will migrate over. So if they're service implementation plans that were created before the process existed, then they will still migrate over, but they will migrate over as attachments, PDF attachments to the person's record instead. So similar to that psychosocial, you'll find them in the person record attached under the attachments section. Only the ones that are in the process that are active, current SIPs will migrate over into the SIP form itself.
There's a question about the choice letter saying the choice letter is still only required with initial classification, correct? So I didn't pull up I should have shown that form because we talked about comp assessment this week in a lot of detail and PCP itself. But so the choice letter has always, I can't think of is it dimension? Is that the EAS word? It's always been actually on every, but you're right. Historically, we'd only required it with the initial classification, but the language on the HCBS choice letter that you'll see in the form as it lives in Evergreen is a bit expanded. It talks about not just the choice between institution and community HCBS services, but understanding the right of choice between services and providers. So all that to say, I agree with you that historically when the choice letter was more narrow, it was only required with initial classification. But again, as I just described, hopefully clearly enough, it's broader now. And my hope is again that because of the efficiencies in the system, it's going to be no biggie to have that done as well.
Yeah, and the HCBS choice form is a form in Evergreen that can be filled out in Evergreen. You don't have to complete it on paper anymore. And then you can just link that HCBS choice to your classification reclassification packet.
There is a question, Leslie, about reportable events. So while I think there's some date related questions, it's at the very bottom saying, will all providers be able to see reportable events that get migrated over from EIS?
Yeah. The question then goes on to say, I could foresee this maybe being a sensitive issue depending on the content that case managers can see everything, but service providers can only see the ones that they generate, from what I understand. Reportable events will migrate over, and they will be access controlled. So in a similar fashion to the way that they're access controlled in EIS right now. Let me just tell you what that is. So individuals who work for a provider organization will only see reportable events that were created by their organization. So, and that's similar for like all the forms. So, um, they're not going to be able to see, like, if they can see a form per se, they're not going to be able to see all of the forms. They're going to be able to see the forms that were created by their organized individual staff members in their organization. So for reportable events, that would be true. That would also be true for like service implementation plans and things like that. They're not going to be able to see everybody's service implementation plans. They're going to be able to see their own organization's plans, things that were created by someone in their organization.
There's a question, a number of questions, and I hope I'm being clear. And I typed a few answers when I felt like it was a shorter clarification, but there's a question asking, would it be okay to do the comp assessment 90 to 120 days prior to the PCP effective date? I know it's due annually, and as major changes occur, I didn't know if there's any specific rules around dates for the comp assessment. So there's a section 13 requirement, I believe, right, for an initial assessment to be done within 30 days, I believe, of becoming someone's case manager. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. And then I believe annually or as significant changes occur thereafter. So because of the sequencing, thinking backwards from the PCP effective date, that's my brain works at least. It is true that you want to be having the comprehensive assessment in a complete status so that it flows into the PCP that you're working on through that planning process. So again, I could see where maybe I'm maybe addressing a couple of people's questions here. There's a related one asking again, should we complete the comp assessment before reversioning the PCP for annual planning? It's not called reversioning anymore, but you're right. You should complete the comp assessment before creating a PCP for annual planning to save from entering information manually. But it's asking, would this conflict with the guidelines for completing this assessment relative to the effective date? So it may be that again, if folks are thinking, gee, that you could have your annual plan meeting as early as 60 days before a plan effective date. Yes, you would want to any information that you'd put in a comp assessment. It could be a longer process, right? It's not maybe going to be a quick thing. Sometimes you kind of would add information little by little, but you'd want to be having that in complete status right before you're creating the PCP, like you folks just said, so information can flow in there. So I understand that it may, if there was guidance that said to start a PCP 90 days before, I could understand why folks are thinking that that's too early, because that means you're completing the comprehensive assessment, which contains the level of care related elements sprinkled throughout there. I think it's hard to talk through dates like this. I think I'm guessing what most folks need is to have like a little bit of a clearer one pager. So I will certainly talk with Angela and liaisons and the research coordinators about that, because I'm worried that through conversations, we're not being as clear as we'd like to be. But you're on the right track that yes, the comp assessment flows into the PCP. You want to have it in complete status and then open the PCP for that annual planning. Again, I know that we're all thinking a little stressed, understandably, about trying to figure out how to get everything done before PCP effective dates. So we will do as best we can to give good guidance on that. I know that those of you that are sitting through a long training late on a Thursday are conscientious folks that are working to try to meet requirements. So we appreciate that, and we'll work with you to try to be as fast as we can and as clear as possible to help you with doing that.
And Emily, I do want to circle back. I answered a question earlier about provider access to the comprehensive assessment, and I misspoke. I do not believe that providers have access to view the comprehensive assessment. And I don't know, and I can't tell right offhand if they'll have access to view the psychosocial. I don't know if they can see it in EIS right now. But if they can see it in EIS right now, they probably will still be able to see it in Evergreen as that attachment. But if they can't see it in EIS right now, then they're likely not going to be able to see it as that attachment either. So apologies for misspeaking on that. I did check that, and it does not appear that their role has access to view the comprehensive assessment in Evergreen.
There's a few questions looks like someone was adding more information. So I don't want to read the whole thing because it's quite long. But again, I think it relates to that same topic I was just speaking to, with questions and concerns about what happens if we don't get the PCP signed or approved at least 30 days prior to the PCP effective date. What I can say to that, and I believe I'm right on this, stop me if I'm wrong, Leslie, is that there is an option to collect signatures after the plan meeting. It's not a required step, so a person could submit for a state review, and then the state review could happen, the invitation for SIPs and reviewing SIPs, but at the point of for a plan to be considered complete, that's when it would need to be signed. And there's understandably there's concerns in this question. Sometimes there's significant delays due to providers not getting SIPs done in 10 days and delays for guardians to sign. It says signed stay sheets, but I'm changing the language to Evergreen language to, I understand there could be delays to sign a PCP. So all that to say, I wish I could, I wish it could resolve, I think, all concerns and questions. But all that to say, I just want to clarify the signature piece at least, because I think what the person was saying was they believed that you had to get the PCP signed at that 30 days prior to the PCP, and that's not the case. Yeah,
that is correct. You're absolutely correct, Emily. Yeah, so the person-centered plan form itself, now that it has this state review workflow in it, it does have two signature sections. There's a meeting signature section and there's a plan signature section. And that meeting signature section is optional. It can be used. You can collect signatures if you are able to before you set it to state review and you do the provider selection piece. But you do not have to. You do have to collect signatures before you set the plan to complete. And that does have to happen before the end date of the current active plan, so that, they have an effective plan before their current active plan ends. But yeah, you don't have to collect signatures in the meeting section. It is an optional additional set of signatures that you can collect at that stage.
was reading the last question, or at least for now, it appears to the last question, reading over a few times, make sure I understand. Again, relating to timeframes and stress about timeframes. It is true that to submit the application / reclassification packet, you need to have a complete PCP. So I think folks are used to sort of a deadline of 30 days prior to some date, in the past it was 30 days prior to the reclass date was this deadline of how late you could be submitting this. I think we, are learning that that's not possible in Evergreen, because the reality is if there needs to be a complete PCP, that's linked to the classification or reclassification packet. It's again, if folks are having a deadline of state review 30 days prior to the PCP effective date, it's not going to be possible to have that much time to review classification reclassification packets. I guess I'm talking about reclassifications here. So all that to say, we will learn to do some stuff faster. I mean, it's easy for me to say now. Evergreen has a lot of efficiencies, though. I think I can't split the day. I don't know the phrase I'm trying to say, but I need to emphasize
that enough or underscore that enough. Yeah.
Thank you. I need to emphasize that. Again, it's a different world. We don't have information that's in different people's email boxes. I can view one queue. We can certainly, again, we have the benefit of again being able to message within the system, and at some stages request clarification within the system, which again sends alerts, and it will be crystal clear what the workflow is and who did what when, what dates different things were accomplished. So all that to say, I'm not here to minimize that there's certainly a fair bit of work involved and different schedules to wrap your mind around. But all that to say, a ton of efficiencies too, which I think will help a whole lot. And as we have the experience, and it's scary, but as we have the experience of seeing, how it goes, we will adjust. I think that's the benefit of, like I mentioned, have the ability to see how many submissions there are and how long things are taking. Again, if a resource coordinator is unexpectedly gone for a week, work is not waiting. We know everything that is pending, and it's not just their work, right? It's work that others can complete as well. So I think that all that to say, I can understand very much concerns, but I do think, I just want to mention this. It is worth sharing the information with individuals in terms of, there are, clear deadlines. And again, there will be not an authorization in place, and not a reclassification in place, if information is not received. So if that is helpful, I don't say that to scare people, but if that is helpful to pass along, and if we can be supportive in developing plain language materials so that that's clear to folks, we can certainly be supportive in that as well. Just in terms of, again, it's especially important that this happen in order for this authorization to continue. All that to say, so I think that is real. That that there are impacts to not completing things by deadlines, and it's not ideal. It would certainly be frustrating. I could imagine, for anybody, and for members and for providers for there to not be authorizations in place. But again, we'll work as fast as we can, and we will learn as much as we can from the system and adjust as we need. So.
Looks like the last question that just came in is somebody still having trouble getting into the sandbox training environment, and indicating that they were told to keep trying to log in, and if that doesn't work, to contact them again next week. Yeah, that is true. Our vendor had to attempt to change the settings in that environment so that we could get you guys in there. And so I know that there are still some people that are getting an error message when they try to log in, but if you keep trying, and it should ultimately log you in. I think some people are still getting like the failed login attempt error, even though that's not true. So just make sure that you go back to the email, make sure you're using the right username and password. Maybe even try copying and pasting from that email rather than typing. I think that will work as well, and maybe will help you get in there. If you're copying and pasting it though, and there's a space at the end, it might be not letting you in because there's a space at the end. So make sure that if you copy and paste, you really truly just get the password. It's the password that's the most sensitive. I mean, you have to have the right username, but that's less sensitive as far as case. The password has to be exact, and you can't have any spaces or anything like that. So keep trying. If you are still having trouble, definitely reach back out, and Nancy will try to help you next week. She's out, I think, tomorrow. So, but she'll be back, I think, on Tuesday. So if you're still having trouble, definitely let her know, and she'll get you in there. Looks like
For
maybe
once, we have no open questions, Leslie.
I was like, I think we actually got them all.
54 questions we've answered. So, we do have a few more minutes, but
I
if
guess we
that's
can,
everyone's questions, then.
yeah, I think we can definitely say thank you all for your questions. Some great questions. Again, this was a tough topic. Lots of questions around this topic, understandably. But hopefully you got some good information here. Hopefully we were able to answer your questions for you adequately. But definitely we'll be posting this recording, the slide deck sometime next week, hopefully early next week. I also do, again, will underscore get into that sandbox. I know Kevin was having trouble, and I apologize, Kevin, and hopefully we can get you in there soon, but hopefully the rest of you are being able to get in there and test it out. Use the person record that you received, add these forms. You have extra access in that environment so that you don't have to rely on colleagues or counterparts or somebody else to work these forms through the workflow. Get them in there. Add a comprehensive assessment, add a PCP, get it through all the workflow, see how it flows for you, what data you need to enter, and that kind of stuff. It really will help you solidify what you're hearing here and understand how it works in the system. And I think once you're able to key it in yourself and try it out yourself, you'll find out that it's not quite as confusing as it sounds when we're trying to explain it to you, or you're seeing just some of these screenshots or seeing us navigate around pretty quickly. I think it'll be a little bit easier to comprehend, and when you can, apply it and do it yourself. And then once you've had a chance to do that, then come back to those Q&A sessions, and then we'll try to answer your questions that you have at those sessions. And hopefully you'll even be able to see some of the answers yourself when you navigate around in there. And thank you guys for hanging with us on a Thursday afternoon, right up and almost to the end of the day for a long session. We really appreciate your participation. There was quite a large group here today, so that's awesome. Happy to have you. Excited to get into the new system with you. But be patient with us. It's going to be a lot of people in a new system, and everybody's going to be learning at their own pace. But we will be putting out a post-deploy support plan, hopefully in the next week or so, so that you know who to go to ask for help when you need help when we get in there. And there will be a few of these workarounds that we have to do for a short period of time, but we will get those issues resolved as quickly as possible for you, so that it's even smoother of a transition for you. So thanks, everybody.
Folks.
Thank you, Emily.